At Tom's trial, Mr. Justice Cook presided over an unfair trial, and for that he must take responsibility. However, I do not stop there. The Serious Fraud Office and their representatives are under a duty to prosecute fairly. And just because a judge gives them a direction that is totally in their favour, but actually wrong in law, my view is that they were and are under a duty to inform the court and to attempt to correct the position. In that, the SFO failed spectacularly, and the result destroyed people's lives who frankly did not deserve it. I'd like to thank Tom's exceptional counsel, Adrian Derbyshire KC and Tom Doble, who have been amazing to work with. I think we've made a great team. But most of all, I'd like to say thank you to Tom and Sarah for trusting me with this case and taking me on this journey with them. I think the most important thing that I've done over the last 9 years is just to be the one that picks them up the soonest from yet another knockback and say, right, we fight on. And that's what we've done, and we've finally won. But in some ways, there are no winners here. Tom has missed out on formative years with his son, time with his family, and the loss of his career and his home, time he will never get back. The case highlights numerous problems with our criminal justice system, all of which I believe meet the criteria for a public inquiry. The Supreme Court is critical of the drafting of the indictment by the SFO and their team. Tom was charged on an indictment containing conspiracy to defraud, contrary to common law. This charge has caused many miscarriages of justice because it is hopelessly vague. That the CCRC took so long, over 6 years, to refer the case back to the Court of Appeal, it was just all far too slow. The right of the Court of Appeal to prevent criminal cases going to the Supreme Court unless they certify a point of law should be removed. The prosecution of individuals by organisations other than the CPS, I include in this, as well as the SFO, the Post Office and the RSPCA, should be removed. The only body who should be bringing criminal prosecutions in the United Kingdom are the Crown Prosecution Service. The dual role of the SFO as investigator and prosecutor creates a substantial conflict of interest, which creates miscarriages of justice. Thank you very much. Justice at last.
It's quite hard to follow.
Yeah.
Very hard to follow. This is a really bittersweet moment. The sweetness for me is in 3 parts. The first is that Carlo and Tom, after 10 years and 1 day of that mad ruling by Justice Cook, has been corrected. The second is that the ruling today in the Supreme Court is likely to offer a route by which the others who have been convicted and who have served time in prison can right the wrong that has been done to them. And the third is that, albeit very, very late in the day, the system has recognized that it made a significant mistake and it has corrected it. And for that, I think it needs some acknowledgement. But as I said at the beginning, there is some bitterness, and the bitterness is in 2 parts. The first is that it took such a long time to correct for any criminal lawyer, and anybody who has watched Suits or LA Law, and now I'm dating myself, will recognize that there is a fundamental error in the way this case was prosecuted, and a way in which the Crown Courts and the Court of Appeal have repeatedly endorsed until the Supreme Court finally overruled it, which was there is a distinction in the roles between the judge and the jury. And for some reason, and we can maybe get on to what that reason was, in this case, that distinction was overridden and the judges usurped the role of the jury. And that should not happen in a country that abides by the rule of law. The second is really contained in Lord Justice Legate's opening remark. And he says, and I'll read it to you, and it's all there on the public, in the judgment now, the history of these 2 cases raises concerns about the effectiveness of the criminal appeal system in England and Wales in confronting legal error. Now, whilst the Supreme Court righted the wrong for Carlo and Tom, unfortunately, the judgment does not unpack why that happened in this case. And Karen has very eloquently pointed to some of those errors in terms of the failure, the spineless failure of the Court of Criminal Appeal to correct a fundamental error of a Crown Court judge is a significant failing. And the second error is the failure of the Criminal Cases Review Commission to rapidly investigate this and then refer it up to the Court of Appeal. And the third is the systemic wrong that Karen and David have just touched upon, of the Court of Appeal acting as a gatekeeper in criminal cases as to what cases can and can't go to the Supreme Court. So that, in a nutshell, is what I would say.
That's not a bad follow-on. Okay, let's go to questions. Ben from Times. Yeah.
Tom and Carlo, what are you going to do next? Because obviously you had to relinquish a lot of money that was deemed the proceeds of crime. How much do both of you have to hand over? What might you do to recoup that? And also, is there any other compensation that you're owed from the government, given your convictions have now been quashed? Thank you very much.
Well, in terms of compensation for the fact we were imprisoned, we won't get anything thanks to Chris Grayling. He changed the law in 2014 in relation to that. When I say we won't get anything, I need to take advice, I should say, but I very much doubt it. Proceeds of crime, reduce some money back. I haven't sat down and worked out. I think they give us like 2% compounded interest. So, yeah, might be able to. It might be slightly more than they took from me. But I mean, for me, I don't really want today to be, from my perspective, focused on money or even compensation. Those are all matters to sit down and machinate over in the future. And it's a very broad question. What do I want to do next? I've lived the last 10 years on a 24-hour basis because I've been unable to plan any aspect of my life. So from 2012 onwards, I faced the 200-year indictment in the US. I was being prosecuted in the UK. I didn't know where I was going to be, which continent I was going to be on. I was then facing a criminal trial. I was then in prison. I was then out on license. So my ability to plan anything has just disappeared. So the only way I could actually live my life was just living 24 hours, going from one day to the next. And now suddenly the vista of freedom and choice and what I might do has been opened up to me. And everyone says, well, what are you going to do? And my answer to that is simply, I don't know. My main goal is to go and live close to the sea. I don't know where, but I'd like to be near a large body of water. And I can't really explain why that is, but that's really what I would love to do.
Right. As Tom says, today's not about money. Just a matter of fact, about 4 weeks ago, I think about then, I raised the whole question of the compensation arrangements with the Prime Minister, and very unusually, he said he'd look at it. So we may be seeing a change on that front.
That's across the.
It's well, as Tom referred to, there've been two changes in the compensation arrangements. One is over the size, and the other is over who qualifies. And the effect of that is 93% of people who are wrongfully convicted and serve prison terms are not allowed to claim compensation. Right, and those that do, I think, are charged rent.
Bed and board. I think they've changed.
Bed and board by Her Majesty's Prison Service, right? So all those things should be looked at. Actually, to be fair to Mr. Sir Keir Starmer, that was an area of interest of his before he came into politics, and he did actually engage in the question when it was asked. Normally speaking, you know what Prime Minister's questions are like. It's sort of it's not about question and answer normally, but on that day he showed serious interest. So we'll see. We'll see on that front. Other questions? Sir.
Hi, Tom. John Paul Ford from the Daily Mail. Congratulations on today's ruling. I just wanted to ask you a bit more about how you felt in the precise moment when you learned of the ruling, and whether that elation was mixed with, some other people have talked about bitterness and anger. You haven't said anything about that because you've lost so much, and that's been touched on as well. So I just wanted to, if you do feel anger, and if you do want the judge in particular to have to answer for the quite severe criticisms that were made of him today.
I think those criticisms, personally speaking, those criticisms for me, they say enough in themselves. I've had to deal with a lot of rage and anger and bitterness in prison, and I managed to defeat that in the large part. It's not good for me to be returning to those sorts of emotions. And so, you know, I think Nelson Mandela said, you know, anger is like drinking poison and thinking, you know, drinking poison and think it's going to kill the other person. And for a long time, I've tried not to be angry because it's not been good for my own mental health. So if I seem sanguine, then I can tell you, I battle every day with anger. I battle like a flower bed pulling up weeds all the time to try and stop those emotions, you know, welling up inside me. I think that over the coming weeks and months, and possibly even years, there were definitely questions to answer. And I think that people like David and people like Karen and Hickman Rose will push for answers and maybe push for inquiries and so on and so forth. But today's a happy day. And I think Peter Sullivan was in prison for 38 years and he came out, and the only thing that he said to my knowledge was, "I'm not bitter and I'm not angry." And if he can say that, then I can say that.
If I can add one comment, when I spoke to Tom after he heard about his result, the one thing he said to me is, how are we going to make sure it helps the other 7?
Yeah.
Next question.
Hi, Danny Halpin from the Press Association. For Carlo and Tom, I suppose, I was wondering, what is the next step in sort of who, for example, would you say is accountable or should be accountable for the injustices that you faced, and how do you go about holding them to account?
Carlo, you go first.
I wish I knew. That's a short answer. And I think part of what has been so hard all this time is there was obviously major injustice being done, and the way it was done and the consistency which was done made me believe throughout that none of this was done in good faith, realistically. But the power imbalance and the separation, and you don't know how the system works, you don't know who's doing what, means that from this position you're completely passive. All these things are being done to you. It makes absolutely no sense. You say, unless these people have a very serious, lack of anything, then this is being done on purpose. But you don't know by whom, you don't know how, you just have no idea. There's a system that you're just completely passive and you just take it. And I don't even know how to, get that, information.
We have a question from Eric Albert at Le Monde, who asks, would Tom and Carlo use the word scapegoats for the financial crash to refer to themselves?
Well, I mean, the word scapegoat's been used about both of us continually. We had nothing to do with the financial crisis, like zero. It's always astounded me that I think the narrative that got pushed in the early times was that people lost their houses because of us. I worked in Tokyo dealing with Japanese clients in Japanese yen, and things were moving around, like interest rates might have moved to the 4th decimal place. You got people like, at the time, Wonga were lending money for 6,000%. And it just seemed flabbergasting to me that we could ever be associated with the financial crisis, because we literally had nothing to do with it. But we got caught up in a lot of politics surrounding the financial crisis, that's for sure. And there was that big sort of like desire from institutions and politicians who were acting in their own self-interest largely, for people to go to prison. And, we were silent in the main because we were told by our lawyers not to talk to the press, and we allowed that false narrative to propagate and spread.